Welcome back to Panda AudioBooks. The silence of the void mists has been replaced by the cold, calculating glare of the heavenly sentinels. In our last episode, Jian Wushuang inherited the heart-slaying technique from the first sword god, but as the mists cleared, he found himself staring down the barrel of the sovereign's most elite execution squad. Today, we test the soul. Chapters 226 through 230 take place in the Starlight Graveyard, a region filled with the frozen debris of shattered moons. The heavenly sentinels don't fight like soldiers, they fight like a single machine, their minds linked by a collective hive will. To break them, Wushuang cannot rely on brute force. He must use his new technique to sever the spiritual threads that connect them. It's a race against time. If he can't break the line, the rebel fleet will be picked apart by the sentinels' long-range star-piercing bows. The gods are watching. Chapter 226 starts right now. Chapter 226, The Bloodline of Sword Ancestor. Jian Wushuang was a little bit surprised. Different types of origin had different properties. World origin was naturally comprehended by Jian Wushuang after he combined the 4 sword essences. World origin contained everything in the heaven and earth. It was a source of energy that was perfect in all aspects and without flaws. However, slaughter origin was an origin that was extremely cruel. Slaughter origin was specialized in attacking and killing. In terms of killing power, it was much stronger than world origin. But in all other aspects, it was no better than world origin. It was extremely cruel and focused on the offense, so it was very hard for people to manage it. The Absolute Beauty said, the second stage of the test was to test your mentality. Although slaughter origin is mainly on killing, the decision to kill must be followed by the conscience. Even if you need to commit a murder, you need to be reasonable and have a clear conscience. You killed many people in an illusory realm of slaughter, but you still held your original mind and was not lost in the killing, so you passed the second stage. Then you entered the final stage of the dreamland, Cliff of Repentance. The third step was the most important one as it was a test of comprehension of the origin. Slaughter origin was originally comprehended gradually through killing. The purpose of the second stage was not just testing, but it also allowed you to slowly store up the killing intent at the same time. In the third stage, the killing intent would suddenly be activated when you confronted a guardian in the dreamland. The moment when the killing intent broke out was the best time for you to fully comprehend slaughter origin and hopefully succeed as well. The Absolute Beauty was smiling. However, hearing this, Jian Wushuang had an odd expression on his face. He did not expect that the first test on the ancestors' land included so many complicated steps, and all with astonishing difficulties. The tests of the mind and mentality were very difficult for him. Any hesitation could bring him into a disastrous state. The final stage was even more difficult to overcome. It was known that origin was extremely powerful, so it was not something that can be easily comprehended. After he got the 4 sword essences combined step by step, Jian Wushuang luckily comprehended a slight fraction of origin. However, he had never learnt about slaughter origin, neither did he comprehend the killing sword essence. Therefore, it would be even more difficult for him to comprehend slaughter origin through the first test. Fortunately, the dreamland had been gradually enhancing his killing intent. He finished all the steps except the last one. The last one was the most important. Jian Wushuang made it in the end. Were the tests that my father passed before similar to mine? Jian Wushuang looked towards the Absolute Beauty and asked. Yes. The Absolute Beauty nodded. He comprehended slaughter origin in the illusory realm of slaughter, same as you did. The difference was that he spent 4 months on it, while you just spent 3. To a certain extent, you are even stronger than your father. 3 months. Jian Wushuang's face changed. Did I stay in the dreamland for 3 months? He knew that the amount of people he had killed in the dreamland was considerable, but he didn't know how exactly many people he had killed, and how long he had been there. Now he knew. Young man, since you have passed the first test of the ancestors' land, you have become a disciple of the bloodline of Sword Ancestor since today, the Absolute Beauty said. Bloodline of the Sword Ancestor? Jian Wushuang was shocked. Let's talk about it outside. The Absolute Beauty walked outside the palace with the strong man. Jian Wushuang followed them at once. The Absolute Beauty led Jian Wushuang to an altar. The altar looked old, and nothing could be seen there except few stelae. In the right front of the altar, there was a chain bridge. The iron bridge was extremely long and it extended to the deep into the ancestors' land. Standing at the altar, Jian Wushuang overlooked the far end of the chain bridge, without any objects obstructing his sight. "Young man, what's your name?" The absolute beauty looked towards Jian Wushuang and asked. "Jian Wushuang," Jian Wushuang replied. "Jian Wushuang? I am Jin Ling." Then the absolute beauty pointed to the strong man next to her and said, "This is my second brother, Mushan. I believe you've already known that my brother and I are not humans." Jian Wushuang nodded slightly. Since Jian Wushuang entered the ancestors' land for the first time and glanced at the strong man Mushan, he had already known that Mushan was not a human being. "Actually, we are puppet fighters," said Jin Ling, "same as what I expected." Jian Wushuang took a deep breath. Though he had guessed Jin Ling and Mushan's real identities long time ago, yet now he was still shocked lightly after Jin Ling confirmed it. It was known that normally puppet fighters never had intelligence. They just obeyed their master's orders unconditionally like tools. However, despite being puppet fighters, they were no weaker in intelligence than humans. He had never heard a puppet fighter like this before. Needless to say, such puppet fighters should be of extremely high level. Not sure about the level of their fighting capabilities. Jian Wushuang pondered. "I can tell that you have a lot of questions right now. Go ahead to ask me. Now you are the disciple of the bloodline of Sword Ancestor, so you are qualified to know some things," said Jin Ling. "I want to know what the ancestors' land is, and what is the relationship between it and me?" Jian Wushuang asked. "The ancestors' land is the cemetery for the Sword Ancestor." Jin Ling looked at Jian Wushuang. "As for the relationship between you, it is simple. You are the descendant of the bloodline of Sword Ancestor." "The descendant of a Sword Ancestor?" Jian Wushuang was stunned. Jin Ling explained. "You are indeed the descendant of the Sword Ancestors. Your identity can be reflected through your awakening of the Sword Soul, so you don't need to doubt it. Many years ago, there was a person of tremendous power existing both in the heaven and earth. He was the Sword Ancestor, the ancestor of the Sword Principle. He was the recognized number one in terms of the Sword Principle comprehension. Sword Ancestor built the bloodline of Sword Ancestor, and made it into a super powerful force. At the peak of the bloodline of Sword Ancestor, the strength they had far exceeds your imagination. However, 1,000 years ago, Sword Ancestor suddenly died without a reasonable explanation. After Sword Ancestor died, the bloodline of Sword Ancestor collapsed instantly. It was uprooted by another force, and the disciples there suffered cruel treatment from their enemies. Finally, only a few disciples survived and they fled here later on. But they were unable to bring back the bloodline of Sword Ancestor again, so finally they were just killed. And afterwards, the mansion of Sword Marquis emerged. Actually, the predecessor of the mansion of Sword Marquis is the bloodline of Sword Ancestor. The disciples of the mansion of Sword Marquis are all descendants of the bloodline of Sword Ancestor. Chapter 227. 3 Opportunities. "Is it like this?" Jian Wushuang secretly nodded. He was born in the mansion of Sword Marquis, but he never knew such history there. At the same time, he was saddened by the current situation of the mansion of Sword Marquis. After all, it had been a powerful sect before. "What is Sword Soul?" Jian Wushuang looked at Jin Ling and asked, "Why have people been trying to assassinate me ever since my Sword Soul was awakened?" Jian Wushuang had been eager to know this for some time. Blood Feather Tower never stopped attempting to assassinate him. What's worse, now the Holy Emperor Palace had taken part in the assassination. It was known that among the assassinations he suffered, several had made him nearly die. That was why he was so eager to know the reason. "I know this as well," Jin Ling said. "Sword Soul is the soul of the Sword Principle. It can only be awakened by the geniuses who are born with astounding talent. Even when the bloodline of Sword Ancestor was at its peak, only 2 or 3 geniuses awakened their Sword Soul over several decades. Even though the bloodline of Sword Ancestor has declined, your father and then you awaken the Sword Soul, which could only be called a miracle. As for the assassination," That was because the transcendent forces which toppled the bloodline of Sword Ancestor knew the existence of the mansion of Sword Marquis a long time ago. However, powerful as the forces were, they were unable to completely eliminate the mansion of Sword Marquis and finish the bloodline of Sword Ancestor due to some special reasons. Although they weren't able to completely destroy the bloodline of Sword Ancestor, they could stop it from re-emerging. Therefore, the transcendent forces had been sending people to watch the mansion of Sword Marquis. The ordinary disciples in the mansion of Sword Marquis wouldn't threaten them. Even if 1 or 2 disciples became geniuses, the forces wouldn't attach much weight to them. However, the Sword Soul. Even in the bloodline of Sword Ancestor when in its peak time, the ones who are able to awaken the Sword Soul can be called the super geniuses. Such geniuses will gain great achievements in the future, as long as they do not stumble midway. The ones who are more powerful can be absolute experts. Only such geniuses can attract the force's attention and make them fear. So, no sooner had the mansion of Sword Marquis possessed a super genius who awakened the Sword Soul, than the violent force immediately took actions to eliminate him. That's why your father and you became their assassination targets. Hearing this, Jian Wushuang was stunned. Is this the reason? Unbelievable. He muttered. The people who had awakened the Sword Soul were all super geniuses. They would make the transcendent force fear the repercussions. That was why the force wanted to kill them. But the ordinary disciples in the mansion of Sword Marquis did not attract the transcendent force's attention at all. You just said that the transcendent force is unable to destroy the mansion of Sword Marquis due to some special reasons. What are the reasons? Who is the violent force? Is it the Holy Emperor Palace? Jian Wushuang asked without stopping. Jinling furrowed her brow slightly, shook her head and replied, "The questions you are asking are beyond your authority. I can't tell you." What? Jian Wushuang was astonished. Jinling continued, "The 3 tests in the Ancestors' Land represent 3 kinds of identities and authorities. You just passed the first test. So being an ordinary disciple in the bloodline of Sword Ancestor, you're just authorized to know some basic questions about the bloodline of Sword Ancestor. The questions you just asked belong to the scope of the core disciple, only they are authorized to know. To become a core disciple, you need to pass the second test. However, you are not qualified to challenge the second test at all with your current realm." Jian Wushuang's expression changed, but he soon calmed down by taking a deep breath. "Do you have any other questions?" Jinling looked towards Jian Wushuang and asked. "No," Jian Wushuang shook his head and replied. He already knew a lot. At least he knew the reason why he had been chased. He also knew the relationship between him and the Ancestors' Land. It was already enough. For the other questions, he had to put them aside and figure them out later. Good then. You are too weak right now, so it's pointless even if you know a lot. Your current priority is to try your utmost to increase your strength, Jinling said with a smile. You passed the first test of Ancestors' Land. As per the rule, you can get 3 opportunities. 3 opportunities? Jian Wushuang immediately looked towards Jinling and asked with excitement. Opportunity and danger often accompanied one another. During the first test, he'd almost found himself dead several times. Finally he passed it, which meant he got 3 opportunities. It's just he did not know what they were. 3 opportunities total. The first one is that you may freely ask for 3 things. They can be nature treasures, manuals about cultivation method, or rare elixirs. But, the condition is they must apply to the authority of the ordinary disciples. Tell me, what is it you need? Jinling asked. Jian Wushuang at once set himself into thinking. He could only ask for 3 things, so he must think about it carefully. I've made up my mind. Jian Wushuang suddenly looked up and said. Tell me. Jinling replied. I need a treasure that can help me to recover the Dantian and strength, said Jian Wushuang. Recover the Dantian? Jinling looked at him in surprise. My father's Dantian was destroyed. Jian Wushuang explained. I see. Jinling nodded slightly and then immediately said, there are 2 kinds of treasures that can recover the Dantian. One is 7-colored soul-seizing vine, and the other is reversal red scorching elixir. Both can recondition the broken Dantian. However, their disparity in effect is enormous. The colorful spiritual vine is a kind of nature treasure, which is extremely rare and precious. It can not only help someone to recondition the dantian, but can also make the dantian be more vast after the reconditioning. The vast dantian will greatly enhance a person's strength in activating and storing up spiritual power. With the 7-colored soul-seizing vine, your father's broken dantian could be reconditioned, but he has to rely on himself to accumulate the spiritual power. That is to say, his recultivation must be started with the spirit path. Of course, his recultivation speed will be extremely fast. It won't take long for him to reach the realm he was at before. In the future, he will have more opportunities to challenge the higher levels. However, the reversal red scorching elixir is a little bit extreme. It can recondition your father's dantian as well. The difference is that after the reconditioning, your father's strength can be immediately recovered. At the same time, the reversal red scorching elixir will substantially extract your father's potential, and then make his strength directly ascend to a higher level. Needless to say, the extraction of the potential is helpful. However, it has a disadvantage as well. The disadvantage is that once your father greatly enhances his strength, his realm will be hindered. In the future, he will barely be able to improve his realm. Speaking of this, Jinling paused, and looked towards Jian Wushuang one more time. Between the two treasures, the 7-colored soul-seizing vine has a higher value, but you are not qualified to get it yet with your current authority, so you can only choose the reversal red scorching elixir. Chapter 228, The Rainstorm Palace. Hearing what Jinling said, Jian Wushuang felt a little bit disappointed. Between the 7-colored soul-seizing vine and the reversal red scorching elixir, Jian Wushuang was inclined to the former. Although his father needed to recultivate his spirit path after the dantian got reconditioned by the 7-colored soul-seizing vine, he had potential to keep enhancing his strength in the future. Meanwhile, the reversal red scorching elixir was too extreme. Though it could help his father greatly enhance his strength, his potential would be greatly consumed. In the future, he wouldn't be able to enhance himself further at all, which meant it would be impossible for him to be a top expert. It was a shame that Jian Wushuang's was unable to get him the 7-colored soul-seizing vine due to his current level of authority. Then I'll take the reversal red scorching elixir. Better than nothing. After I get my father out, I will give the elixir to him. He will need to decide if he should take it, said Jian Wushuang. Jinling nodded slightly and said, "What about the remaining 2 items? What you want?" "I want 2 sword skills. One applies to world origin, and the other one applies to slaughter origin," replied Jian Wushuang. He had just comprehended world origin and slaughter origin not long ago. Having comprehended the origin, he naturally needed the corresponding original sword technique to perfectly display his origin strength. It is easy to get a sword skill that applies to world origin. The selfless sword technique I gave you before is a kind of original sword technique, and it is intended to be directed towards world origin. However, you only have the first half of the volume, and now I will give the second half of the volume to you. What do you think?" Jinling said. "That's fine." Jian Wushuang nodded. He had been studying the selfless sword technique. However, the best he could do so far was the third movement, Sky Isolating Form. However, he knew clearly how fierce the selfless sword technique had been a long time ago. Previously he had succeeded in combining 3 sword essences, and then 4 sword essences, but neither could completely activate the real power of the sword skill. The power of the sword skill could only be perfectly displayed by comprehending the origin. What's more, the origin must be world origin. Even more, the first half volume of the selfless sword technique contains 6 movements. It should be the same for the other half, so there would be a total of 12 swordsmanship types for the whole volume, which was plenty for Jian Wushuang to study. As for the sword skill that applies to slaughter origin, Jinling frowned slightly. "What's wrong? You don't have it?" Jian Wushuang asked with doubt. "No, we have it. The problem is, we have too many," Jinling replied. "Too many?" Jian Wushuang was stunned. "Young man, you should know that the bloodline of Sword Ancestor specializes in Sword Principle, and that the Sword Principle is a way of killing. The warriors who study the Sword Principle can only completely display their killing abilities by comprehending slaughter origin. Therefore, When the bloodline of Sword Ancestor was at its peak, plenty of experts chose Slaughter Origin to comprehend. Sword Ancestor is an example. His best skill is Slaughter Origin. In the bloodline of Sword Ancestor, a great number of experts chose to comprehend Slaughter Origin. That's why the sword skills that apply to Slaughter Origin are more than that of other origins. As per your current authority level, you can get more than 100 sword skills that apply to Slaughter Origin. Let's do it this way. I'll give you a sword skill list, and you can take your time to pick one you want, Jinling uttered while giving Jian Wushuang the list. Jian Wushuang gave a glance at the list. Numerous sword skill names and their descriptions were immediately visible. Jian Wushuang started to review them at once. In a second, he fixed his eyes on a sword skill. Blood Emptying Technique. It was a sword skill with extremely potent and monstrous power. There were 3 sword movements for the Blood Emptying Technique, which was obviously too few compared to the Selfless Sword Technique, as there were 12 for the latter. However, in terms of value, the Blood Emptying Technique was better than the Selfless Sword Technique. Though there are only 3 sword movements for the Blood Emptying Technique, every movement was super powerful. What's more, each movement is a killing move. Jian Wushuang's eyes were shining. Killing power was the most important characteristic to Slaughter Origin, so he should cultivate the killing move with that startling power, and get the best use out of it. That way, he could completely activate his killing power. I've decided. I'm going to choose the Blood Emptying Technique. Jian Wushuang told her his decision. Blood Emptying Technique? Jinling was surprised, but nodded. A moment later, Jinling took out the 3 things that Jian Wushuang wanted. They were Reversal Red Scorching Elixir, the other half of the volume of Selfless Sword Technique, and Blood Emptying Technique. I've given your first opportunity. As for the second one, you can stay in the Rainstorm Palace for a month. Jinling gave Jian Wushuang a glance, and then continued, follow me. Rainstorm Palace? Jian Wushuang looked a little excited. Soon after, he moved his paces and followed Jinling. He came to a corner in the ancestors' land under the guidance of Jinling. By then, what appeared in front of him was a huge mountain with a cave underneath. Is this cave the Rainstorm Palace? Jian Wushuang asked. Yes, said Jinling. Don't look down on this cave. You will find the inside is amazing when you go in. But remember that you can only stay here for 1 month. How much strength you can enhance in this time frame will depend on you. Jian Wushuang nodded continuously, and soon after stepped inside the cave. The inside of the cave was enormous, and the entire cave was filled with a gloomy draft. Jian Wushuang looked around carefully. Suddenly a huge painting that was surrounded by the gloomy draft was dimly visible. Painting? Jian Wushuang was a little bit excited. At the same time, he was a little bit nervous. He couldn't see the painting clearly until he got closer. This was a rainstorm picture. The rainstorm picture was filled up by a large number of raindrops. Jian Wushuang counted them carefully and found the quantity was about 1,000. These raindrops. Jian Wushuang couldn't help looking at the raindrops carefully. In Jian Wushuang's eyes, the raindrops turned to a myriad of sword light. In a little while, they turned to numerous violent sword essences and flew to the 9th heaven. With the perspective of world origin, Jian Wushuang found that the sword light looked so miraculous, embracing everything in the heaven and earth, as if inside each of them was the core of the world. Through the sword light, he even saw the scenes when he displayed the 4th, 5th, and 6th movements of the Selfless Sword Technique. However, with Slaughter Origin perspective, Jian Wushuang found that the sword light contained brutal killing essences. They seemed to be slashing, or hacking. All of them looked fierce and invincible. Different origins afforded him different scenes. However, both ended up at the same point. Jian Wushuang immersed himself in the raindrops. He couldn't help pulling out the triple kill sword from the back and then started to display the movements. He totally forgot the existence of time and himself. The entire Rainstorm Palace was actually the Rainstorm picture. Furthermore, this Rainstorm picture was aimed at the origin. In terms of value, the Rainstorm picture was much better than the sword tomb where Jian Wushuang had stayed for 2 years. His meditation at the Rainstorm picture totally consumed Jian Wushuang, so much so that he didn't notice how time flew at all. A month has passed. Come out. Jinling suddenly shouted. She had been waiting outside the rainstorm palace the entire time. "Come out! Come out! Come out!" The shouting reverberated in Jian Wushuang's head, and it got louder and louder. Finally, he woke up. Soon after, Jian Wushuang bounded up and in no time landed outside the rainstorm palace. Chapter 229, Purple Crystal Lake. "How are you feeling?" Jin Ling and Mu Shan rushed over to take a look. With a tint of regret, Jian Wushuang sighed, "Not bad, but it's a pity that the time is so short." Indeed, it was only a month's time, way too short. He was too engrossed in the meditation of the rainstorm picture and had already long forgotten that time existed. He felt like he was only inside for a short while, but a month had passed just like that. Curiosity brought Mu Shan to ask, "Surely your skills have improved by a lot?" "Yes." Jian Wushuang nodded. Although the meditation only lasted for a month, he was able to understand the sword light and sword essence of the origin even deeper from the raindrops. It elevated his skills in world origin and slaughter origin. He even mastered the 4th and 5th moves of the selfless sword technique. It seemed like it would not be long before he mastered the 6th one as well. He has also mastered the 1st move of the blood emptying technique. That all happened within a month only. If he did not close himself away from the world, it would have taken him more than half a year to master the 4th and 5th moves of the selfless sword technique completely. It was even more amazing that he managed to get the hang of the 1st move of the blood emptying technique so quickly. It was meant to take ages for one to comprehend, but he managed to do it within a month, thanks to the rainstorm picture. "Staying in the rainstorm palace for a month has helped me to understand the origin and master my swordsmanship greatly," said Jian Wushuang. Jin Ling replied, "The rainstorm palace was your 2nd opportunity. Now, your 3rd opportunity is here, and that's the Purple Crystal Lake." "Purple Crystal Lake?" Jian Wushuang repeated with a tint of expectation. He did not know what this Purple Crystal Lake was all about, but from what he had gathered during his stay at the rainstorm palace, he can be certain that this lake was like none other. At least, it would be of huge benefit to him. Jin Ling glanced at Mu Shan and ordered, "Mu Shan, you bring him there." "Yes." Mu Shan nodded upon his orders and proceeded to lead the way. Under Mu Shan's guidance, Jian Wushuang arrived in front of a purple lake. The lake is neither big nor small. The water is as clear as crystal, emitting a faint fragrance. It was like a good old wine, waiting to lure others into its beauty. "This is the Purple Crystal Lake," Mu Shan said. "This lake is made from purple crystal spiritual liquid." "Purple crystal spiritual liquid?" Jian Wushuang's gaze was broken and he had a dumbstruck expression. Purple crystal spiritual liquid had characteristics similar to the primordial spiritual liquid. They were both the purest energy sources in the mortal world. What was different was that the primordial spiritual liquid only works for the beginner warriors in the spirit path and level of transforming sea. On the other hand, the purple crystal spiritual liquid was greatly beneficial even to the experts of the yin-yang void realm. In fact, there were many experts in the yin-yang void realm that transacts using purple crystal spiritual liquid instead of wealth. In the Qianzong dynasty, an expert of the initial yin void realm whose value was worth 100 drops of the liquid was considered impressive. But right now, what was with this lake full of the powerful liquid? Amazed, Jian Wushuang proclaimed, "I'm sure all of the purple crystal spiritual liquid in the Qianzong dynasty combined would not make up even a tenth of this lake." Mu Shan replied, "Jian Wushuang, you can cultivate at the lake for 2 months. During this period, you can do whatever you want with the liquid. 2 months later, I hope your realm can greatly improve." Mu Shan took a glance at Jian Wushuang and walked away. Jian Wushuang was left alone by the purple crystal lake. 2 months. I can cultivate as I like for 2 months. There was a glow of excitement in his eyes, and he jumped in without hesitation. Plop! Jian Wushuang had landed in the lake. His head resurfaced above the waters and he eyed his surroundings. "Let me see how much I can gain from a huge lake like this in 2 months. Jian Wushuang summoned his heavenly creation skill immediately without hesitation. While the effects took place, the waters of the lake stirred like a tornado. The waves were raging wildly while Jian Wushuang remained on the water surface. A tremendous force that swallowed from within arose and the purple crystal liquid gushed into his body at the speed of lightning. This is the furthest the heavenly creation skill could do. Crazy swallow. Taking in everything. The spiritual power inside him started to rise at a puzzling speed. After sending Jian Wushuang to the Purple Crystal Lake, Mu Shan left and came back to Jin Ling. I have already sent him to the lake, Mu Shan said. Okay, Jin Ling nodded and continued. 2 months is not long, neither is it short. I wonder how much his cultivation of spiritual power can improve by then. He has already reached exceptional gold core realm. Although it happened not long ago, as long as he absorbs the purple crystal spiritual liquid as much as he can, then the initial yin void realm is not far away. If he is lucky, he might just reach the profound yin void realm. Mu Shan said. Profound yin void realm? Jin Ling frowned and said, I remember Jian Nantian also cultivated at the Purple Crystal Lake for 2 months before hitting initial yin void realm. He even hit the peak, falling short of the profound yin void realm by a tiny bit. This fella is even more outstanding than his father, being able to break through the completion of the yin void realm. He has a lot of potentials. Jin Ling and Mu Shan were busily engrossed in their discussion and were oblivious to whatever was happening in the lake. If they were to take a look at what was happening, they would want to take back their words, because the Purple Crystal Lake had gone haywire completely. Jian Wushuang had unleashed his heavenly creation skill to its extreme, and the wolfing speed was unbelievably fast. After all, he had cultivated the heavenly creation skill. It was just like back in the days when he was still on the divine path level, drawing power from the primordial spiritual liquid at Nine Wolves Mountain. He was doing it at a speed much faster than any other normal warrior. A regular elixir that raises spiritual power needs a couple of months to be completely digested, but Jian Wushuang only needs a day. Naturally, the speed at which he was harnessing the liquid would be noticeably faster than normal people's. This was the heavenly creation skill, a cultivation method that was against the natural order. Both Jin Ling and Mu Shan agreed that Jian Wushuang would surely reach the initial yin void realm in his 2 months at Purple Crystal Lake. They were even hopeful that he can reach the profound yin void realm. But in reality, on the 3rd day. By the 3rd day of his cultivation, Jian Wushuang's spiritual power in his gold core has reached its extreme. After harnessing enough power, he tried to make a breakthrough to the yin void realm directly. With such a powerful liquid as his foundation, Jian Wushuang seemed confident. He did not require any external help and went straight ahead with the majestic spiritual power stored in him. He succeeded. By his 3rd day of cultivation, he reached the initial yin void realm. After that, he continued to gain strength. By the 10th day, he once again outdid himself and reached the profound yin void realm. In the blink of an eye, 2 months had passed. Chapter 230, Scary Improvement, Peak of the Yin Void Realm. In the Ancestors' Land, Jin Ling and Mu Shan stood together. 2 months have passed. Let's go and look at how that fella is doing, said Jin Ling. I bet that he has already reached the profound yin void realm. Mu Shan laughed. Maybe, but maybe not. Jin Ling smiled. The duo walked side by side towards Purple Crystal Lake and arrived not long after. But when they truly saw what was going on in the lake, both of them were beyond shock. What's this? Jin Ling widened her eyes, staring into the lake. The endless lake before their eyes was as vast as before. But Jin Ling could tell with a glance that the waters had clearly sunk more than a meter. Back in the days when Jian Nantian cultivated here for 2 months, there were no significant changes to the lake. But now, 1 meter. Just how much purple crystal spiritual liquid had been lost for such a vast lake to fall by a meter? It has only been a mere 2 months. How was it possible for him to absorb so much of the purple crystal spiritual liquid? Jin Ling was shocked. This is impossible. How is this big difference possible? Mu Shan was also taken aback. Even if 10 yin void experts tried to absorb the same amount in the same duration, it would still be an impossible feat, this fella's strength. Jin Ling quickly turned towards Jian Wushuang, who was in the middle of the lake. At this moment, Jian Wushuang had stopped absorbing the liquid. His eyes were both opened and emitted a sparkling light. There was a suffocating aura coming out from his body. Rumble. This aura turned into raging wild waves that swept across the purple crystal lake. Upon sensing his aura from the release of spiritual power, Both Jinling and Mu Shan seemed to have blanked out. Peak of the Yin Void Realm? He has actually reached the peak of the Yin Void Realm. In just a mere 2 months, he went from achieving the exceptional Gold Core Realm, to breaking through 4 realms, and now actually reaching the peak of the Yin Void Realm? How is this possible? The duo may have seen and heard many great things, but they were stunned. Indeed, Jian Wushuang's mad accession in power was puzzling. It would not be possible for any normal person to do the same, even if they were to cultivate in the lake itself. However, the duo was unaware that the cultivation of Jian Wushuang is a heavenly creation skill. It is a cultivation method against the natural order like no other. Poof! Jian Wushuang resurfaced above the waters and appeared in front of the duo. He shrugged his shoulders, which upon usage of force, caused all bones of his body to snap one after another. He then held both of his hands together tightly, allowing an explosive force to gather in his hands. Peak of the Yin Void Realm. Jian Wushuang's eyes emitted a strong ray of light. That's a pity. If you gave me half a month more, I would be confident of harnessing enough spiritual power to forcefully break through and reach the Yang Void Realm. He may have said the words himself, but he did not feel that it was a pity at all. After all, his power has risen like crazy the past 2 months. If he were to reach the Yang Void Realm, that would be quite awesome. Right now, I am already at the peak of the Yin Void Realm. In fact, the tip. My spiritual power has clearly improved so much more compared to during the exceptional Gold Core Realm. I should count my blessings. Jian Wushuang laughed. Moreover, his cultivation is a heavenly creation skill. Each step was against the natural order, but yet unique on its own. A normal warrior would reach the Yin-Yang Void Realm, while a heavenly creation skill would cause the Yin and Yang to break. Naturally, it was bound to be different. However, this difference could not be further delved into in the ancestors' land. He can only do it after leaving. Fella, I am very curious. What is your secret? If it is not a huge secret, it would not be possible for you to absorb that much purple crystal spiritual liquid in such a short time. Neither would your spiritual power improve tremendously. Jin Ling stared into the eyes of Jian Wushuang. Jian Wushuang's gaze did not waver. There was indeed a huge secret of his, which was the heavenly creation skill. But this secret would remain a secret under all circumstances. Forget it, everyone has their own secrets. I'm too lazy to dig deeper into this, Jin Ling said casually and added, the third opportunity has already been given to you. Now, you can leave the ancestors' land. Leave right now? Jian Wushuang touched his nose and asked, can't I accept the second test after all this? Second test. Jin Ling smirked. Fella, I am not looking down on you. Although your spiritual power might have improved tremendously these 2 months, you are still not qualified for the test. The second test of the ancestors' land is targeted at experts of divine transcendence. Furthermore, the first and second tests are largely different. The first is much more relaxed. Hence, even though you only reach the exceptional Gold Core Realm, you would have equal chances of passing it as long as you can go against the natural order. But there is no way you will pass the test without divine transcendence. Is it really like this? Jian Wushuang frowned. He initially thought that he could be considered qualified to accept the second test, especially after his improvement. But it seemed like he had underestimated the difficulty of the test by this ancestor's land. If the second test requires experts of divine transcendence, then what about the third one? Jian Wushuang asked out of curiosity. Fella, you should prepare to leave. But before that, hand me the triple kill sword, Jin Ling said. Triple kill sword? Jian Wushuang retrieved the sword from this back and held it in his hand. After a moment of hesitation, he handed it to Jin Ling. Jin Ling received it and touched it gently. She shook her head and laughed. Indeed, you had a peerless killing sword in your possession, but you did not know how to incur its power. Peerless killing sword? Jian Wushuang could not help but look at Jin Ling. This triple kill sword was the first sword of killing from the mansion of Sword Marquis. It was also the only pledge of entry into the ancestors' land. Jian Wushuang had had the sword for ages but never had any queries about it. At most, the sword edge was sharper and the aura was stiffer. Regarding its power, he had no idea that the triple kill sword had other uses. Fella, Wait for me here for a while. I will return it to you later, Jinling said. Okay. Jian Wushuang nodded. Jinling left with the sword in her hand and Jian Wushuang stood there, waiting in silence. Not long after, Jinling returned and threw the sword at him. When he held onto it, Jian Wushuang felt a burst within his heart. He found out that the triple kill sword now contained much more hostility than before. And with the shattering of the hive link, we conclude chapter 230. Wushuang has proven that the heart-slaying technique is the ultimate counter to the sovereign's elite, but the victory has a hollow ring to it. As the sentinels fell, their masks dissolved, revealing faces that Wushuang recognized, warriors from the Azure Heaven domain who were thought to be dead. The divine sovereign isn't just killing his enemies, he's turning them into mindless puppets. The Eclipse Pillar isn't just a power source, it's a soul processor. Join us next time for chapters 231 through 235, as the rebellion reaches the final gate of the capital and Wushuang encounters a sentinel that he cannot bring himself to kill, a man who looks exactly like his father's younger brother. Thank you for listening to Panda Audiobooks. If you're shocked by that twist, hit that like button, subscribe, and tell us in the comments, how far do you think the sovereign's corruption goes?